Hello and welcome back to the history of the Mongols. I'm your host Kyle. In our last episode, we explored the period from 1216 to 1219, focusing on Genghis Khan's return from northern China and the early diplomatic interactions with the Khwarezmian Empire. Three key events during this time set the stage for conflict between the Mongol and Khwarezmian empires. Firstly, the collapse of the Kara-Khitai Empire removed the buffer state separating these two powerful empires, with Mongol forces led by Jebe taking control of the eastern territories, while the Khwarezmians seized western areas extending from the Fergana Valley. Secondly, a clash occurred between Mongol troops commanded by Jochi and Subutai and Khwarezm Shah Muhammad, likely in late 1218 or early 1219. Finally, tensions escalated dramatically following the massacre of a Mongol trade caravan at the Khwarezmian city of Otrar, ordered by its governor Inalchuk, who was Muhammad's uncle. The subsequent execution of a Mongol envoy sent by Genghis Khan to resolve the dispute effectively signalled Khwarezm's declaration of war. With Kara-Khitai gone, the Mongols and Khwarezmians now directly bordered each other in present-day eastern Kazakhstan. Despite later characterizations of the Khwarezmian Empire as fragile, this perception was not obvious to Genghis Khan at the time. The Khwarezmian state controlled an expansive territory originating from the Khwarezm region, modern-day Uzbekistan, south of the Aral Sea. The dynasty's founder, Anushtagin Garchi, had been appointed governor in 1077 by Malik Shah I, the last of the great Seljuk sultans. Over subsequent generations, Anushtagin's successors expanded their empire considerably, encompassing Transoxania, central Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Iran, and even Azerbaijan. However, their grip over regions south of modern Turkmenistan, acquired after 1200, remained tenuous. The Khwarezmian military primarily comprised Turkic Kipchak Kangli, nomadic warriors who fought similarly to Mongols, using horse archers, heavy cavalry, and infantry drawn from the diverse Iranian populations. The Kipchak Kangli also significantly influenced the administrative and bureaucratic structures of the empire. Historically, the Anushtagin dynasty was known for its ambition and strategic cunning, initially serving as vassals under the Seljuks and later the Kara-Khitai. In the late 1190s, Muhammad's father, Takesh, allied with the Abbasid Caliph, defeated and killed Togrul, the last Seljuk sultan. This victory allowed Khwarezmian influence to extend into western Iran, but it also initiated an enduring rivalry with the Abbasids in Baghdad. The fragmentation of the Ghurid Empire in 1206 further expanded Khwarezmian territories towards India's northwestern border, while the Kara-Khitai's internal collapse under Kuchlug permitted their eastward expansion into the strategically valuable Fergana Valley. Given the rapid territorial expansion over just 3 decades, Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II, who ascended the throne in 1200, understandably viewed himself as a dominant ruler in the world. This self-perception might explain his dismissive treatment of Genghis Khan's envoys. From the Mongol viewpoint, the Khwarezmians appeared confrontational, and considering their own rapid growth, Genghis Khan likely perceived them as potential rivals who might soon attempt to capture newly acquired Mongol territories formerly belonging to the Kara-Khitai. Internally, the Khwarezmian Empire was weaker than it appeared. Since most of its territories had only recently been conquered, their reliability under external threat was uncertain. The Kipchak Kangli, who dominated the empire's administration and military, frequently mistreated the urban Iranian population. Many served as mercenaries or owed greater loyalty to Muhammad's mother, Turkan Khatun, rather than to Muhammad himself. Muhammad and his mother were often in direct conflict, issuing contradictory orders. Officials across the empire would commonly receive conflicting instructions, choosing to follow whichever arrived later. This internal rivalry severely undermined Khwarezm's ability to defend itself effectively. Muhammad's actions over the previous 2 decades had also earned him few allies beyond his borders. From Baghdad to Delhi, the Khwarezm Shah was known as greedy, untrustworthy, and aggressively expansionist. As a result, contemporary observers expressed little sympathy for him during times of crisis. Historical accounts, such as that by Ibn al-Athir, explicitly blame Muhammad's aggressive conquests, which eliminated neighbouring buffer states, leaving him directly exposed to Mongol attacks. Most sources agree that Muhammad's mistreatment of the Mongol merchants and envoys triggered the invasion, an event for which he was both responsible and ill-prepared. With this context established, we can now examine the Mongol invasion itself. In the summer of 1219, Genghis Khan commenced his campaign. General Mukhali, commanding 20,000 Mongol troops, alongside tens of thousands of Khitan, Jurchen, Chinese, and Tangut soldiers, was tasked with maintaining pressure on the Jin dynasty. Genghis' brother Temujin was left with a smaller force to safeguard Mongolia. The remaining available forces were mobilized westward against Khwarezm. This combined force included not only Mongol cavalry, but also Uyghur, Karluk, Khitan, and Jurchen horsemen, as well as Chinese siege engineers and medical personnel. Estimates typically place the size of this invading army between 100,000 and 200,000 armed men, excluding their families and support personnel. Accompanying the army were vast herds of horses for remounts, hundreds of thousands of sheep and goats for provisions, and numerous oxen and camels to transport wagons, jurs, supplies, and materials for siege warfare. Altogether, the total number of animals accompanying the army may have approached 1 million. Orders had also been dispatched for the Tangut to supply troops for the Western campaign. However, due to the influence of Asa Gambu, an anti-Mongol minister in the Tangut court, these requests were refused and the Mongol envoys were rebuffed. Contrary to popular belief, this refusal was not the immediate cause of the eventual destruction of the Tangut, though it certainly marked the start of their defiance. The Tangut still provided soldiers for Mukhali's ongoing campaigns elsewhere. Nevertheless, this initial act of insubordination was an early indication of the Tangut's growing independence, eventually leading to their downfall, but that's a topic we'll address in more detail later. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad was proactive, assembling a war council at his capital in Samarkand to strategize defense against the Mongol invasion. Muhammad's courageous son, Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, proposed a bold strategy, assembling the full strength of Khwarezm's military forces to confront the Mongols directly at the Syr Darya River. This river was a significant geographic barrier, offering limited crossing points, advantageous for defense. However, Muhammad hesitated at the idea of pulling troops from southern territories, fearing that doing so could trigger rebellions there. His reluctance to directly face the Mongols in open battle may have also influenced his decision. Ultimately, the council decided to disperse garrisons across major cities in Transoxania, Khwarezm, and Khorasan, regions most likely to face direct Mongol attacks, while Muhammad himself remained south of the Amu Darya River to maintain order and prevent rebellion. This defensive strategy has often been criticized in historical analysis. However, it wasn't entirely without rationale. Historically, invasions from steppe tribes usually lacked effective siege capabilities, causing invaders to settle for raiding and looting the countryside rather than capturing well-defended cities. Muhammad assumed that the Mongols would follow a similar pattern, believing a prolonged campaign without successful sieges would weaken their resolve. Transoxania, bordered by the Amu Darya, Oxus, and Syr Darya, Jaxartes rivers, formed a natural defensive barrier, compounded by the harsh environment of the Kizil-Kum desert between them. Limited crossings on both rivers offered strategic defensive points, theoretically slowing down or possibly halting the Mongol advance. Unfortunately for Muhammad, he underestimated the Mongols' capabilities. He did not fully appreciate the extensive experience the Mongols had gained from their Chinese campaigns between 1211 and 1215, nor did he recognize their strategic advantage in having Chinese engineers skilled in siege warfare. Furthermore, if the Mongols had successfully navigated the challenges of the Gobi Desert, the Kizil Kum would offer little resistance. Genghis Khan's forces reached Otrar, the Khwarezmian frontier city, in autumn 1219, the very location where the Mongol trade caravan had previously been massacred. Despite its robust defences, the city fell after a grueling 5-month siege. Its governor, Inalchuk, was captured and subjected to a legendary punishment. Genghis Khan reportedly ordered molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a stark demonstration of the severe consequences awaiting those who defied the Mongol ruler. The splitting of Mongol forces after reaching Otrar created significant strategic challenges for the Khwarezmian defenders. Had the Mongol army remained united in a prolonged siege at Otrar, there might have been an opportunity for the Khwarezmians to concentrate their forces and counterattack effectively. However, with the Mongols simultaneously assaulting territories along the Syr Darya and maintaining pressure on Otrar, a coordinated Khwarezmian response became impossible. This situation deteriorated further when Genghis Khan unexpectedly crossed both the Syr Darya and the treacherous Kizil Kum Desert. Khwarezmian defenders had anticipated the Mongol route directly towards Samarkand, a well-fortified city, believing the harsh desert terrain impassable for large armies. Nevertheless, aided by local guides and their own formidable resilience, the Mongol forces successfully navigated the desert during winter, emerging deep within Khwarezmian territory in early 1220. The towns of Zarnuk and Nur fell rapidly to the Mongol advance, followed soon after by the strategically significant city of Bukhara. A sortie by Bukhara's garrison was quickly defeated, and though the citadel held out briefly, it eventually succumbed. Notably, it was at Bukhara that Genghis Khan entered a conquered city personally, famously declaring himself the punishment of God, according to the historian Juvaini. Following this victory, the Mongols forced Bukhara's population, especially young men, into the Hashar, a brutal forced labour levy. These individuals were driven ahead of Mongol forces as human shields, performing hazardous siege tasks such as filling moats and assaulting city gates, thereby absorbing defensive attacks that would otherwise threaten valuable Mongol troops. This tactic simultaneously demoralized opponents, inflated the perceived size of the Mongol army, and neutralized the most potentially resistant population segments. Using this ruthless strategy, the Mongol army pushed onward to Samarkand, the Khwarezmian capital, renowned for its formidable defences, including a powerful garrison supported by war elephants. Genghis Khan commenced the siege in March 1220 and was soon reinforced by his sons, Chagatai and Ogedai, fresh from their victory at Otrar, where they had captured the governor, Inalchuk. When Samarkand's defenders launched a desperate counterattack 3 days into the siege, the Mongols annihilated them completely, prompting the city's swift surrender. The citadel resisted briefly until Mongol forces destroyed a nearby dam, whose floodwaters undermined its fortifications. After the capture of Samarkand, skilled artisans and craftsmen were retained for service to the Mongols, women were enslaved, and the rest of the population was subjected to the Hashar. Thus, in a surprisingly brief period, the heart of Shah Muhammad's northern territories was captured. Near the ruins of Samarkand, Genghis Khan again divided his forces, dispatching them throughout Khwarezmian lands. Exploiting internal dissent, Genghis used forged letters, crafted with advice from a Khwarezmian defector, to sow mistrust among Khwarezmian generals by suggesting collaboration with Turkan Khatun, Muhammad's influential mother. This maneuver further crippled the already faltering Khwarezmian leadership. Genghis then sent his trusted generals Jebe, Subutai, and Tokuchar in pursuit of Shah Muhammad, who had fled south as Samarkand fell into flames. Muhammad spent the rest of his life on the run, relentlessly pursued across Khorasan and northern Iran. His mother, Turkan Khatun, was captured along the way. Muhammad ultimately died in December 1220 on a desolate island in the Caspian Sea, suffering from pneumonia and futilely distributing titles and lands to his sons, territories no longer under his control. Thus ended the tumultuous reign of Ala ad-Din Muhammad bin Takesh, Shah of Khwarezm, whose decisions had led to catastrophic losses. Beside him was his son, Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, who assumed his father's title and led continued resistance against Mongol dominance. The subsequent exploits of Jebe and Subutai deserve their own narrative, and we shall return to their journey separately, keeping our focus on the central campaign for now. When Mongol armies crossed the Amu Darya, marking the southern boundary of Transoxania, and Shah Muhammad fled westward, the fate of the Khwarezmian Empire was sealed. The names of the cities differed, the duration of the sieges varied, but the outcomes were nearly identical. Cities that resisted faced brutal assaults, their garrisons were annihilated, and their populations enslaved. Severe resistance or events like the death of a Genghisid prince, such as Tokchar at Nishapur, prompted especially ruthless reprisals, entire populations slaughtered and cities razed to the ground. These acts served as stark warnings. Resistance meant annihilation. Conversely, cities that surrendered immediately were largely spared, required only to dismantle defensive walls, provide provisions and tribute, occasionally supply troops, and accept a Mongol-appointed overseer, a Darukachi, Baskak, or Shana, as referenced in Persian sources. Aside from these conditions, internal affairs remained largely unaffected. However, cities that rebelled after surrender, like Merv, were met with extreme brutality, giving rise to infamous tales of towers constructed from human skulls. Did Genghis Khan initially plan to conquer the Khwarezmian Empire entirely? It's difficult to determine. Certainly even he could not have predicted how swiftly Khwarezmian defences would collapse. With Muhammad fleeing west accompanied by his son Jalal al-Din, individual cities were left isolated, unable to coordinate defences. After Muhammad's death in late 1220, Jalal al-Din attempted to rally remaining Khwarezmian forces at Gurganj, the empire's original capital. Yet internal strife hampered his efforts. Some emirs refused to acknowledge his leadership, influenced by Turkan Khatun, who preferred a more controllable successor. Facing assassination plots, Jalal al-Din abandoned Gurganj. Soon after, Mongol princes Jochi, Chagatai, and Ogadai besieged and destroyed the city after prolonged resistance. Jalal al-Din retreated southeast to Afghanistan, his hereditary domain, untouched by Mongol incursions thus far. Here, he assembled an army estimated at around 60,000, comprising Kangli, Karluks, Khalaj, Afghans, and Guris. As a capable military leader, Jalal al-Din achieved notable victories, including one at Pardwan against Shigi Kutuk, Genghis Khan's adopted son and chief judge. This significant victory in late summer 1221 sparked widespread revolts across Khorasan, with previously surrendered cities like Herat and Merv rejecting Mongol rule. Genghis Khan responded by sending his youngest son, Tolui, to ruthlessly suppress these uprisings. However, Jalal al-Din's triumph at Parwan was undermined by internal dissension. Disputes over battle spoils caused a key commander to defect, taking half the army with him. This division occurred just as Mongol forces began converging toward Genghis to confront Jalal al-Din. Left with diminished forces, Jalal al-Din faced the full force of the Mongol invasion. Attempting escape to India, Jalal al-Din was overtaken by Mongol troops at the Indus River around November 1221. With his army cornered against a cliff above the river, Jalal al-Din fiercely commanded the centre, even as his flanks crumbled under relentless Mongol attacks. Realizing defeat was inevitable, he mounted a final charge to push back the Mongols briefly, then turned his horse and plunged off the cliff into the river below. Mongol archers moved to finish him, but according to historian Giovanni, Genghis Khan himself ordered them to halt, observing Jalal al-Din successfully swim to safety. Turning to his sons, Genghis remarked, "This is the kind of son that every father dreams of. Having escaped 2 whirlpools, water and fire, and reached the bank of safety, he will commit many glorious deeds and cause innumerable misfortunes. How can any reasonable man fail to consider him?" Genghis Khan consistently admired acts of bravery, and Jalal al-Din's courageous resistance at the battle on the Indus River earned him the Khan's respect. However, this admiration did not extend to the other Khwarezmian soldiers, who were largely slaughtered by Mongol arrows while attempting to flee across the river. This decisive battle effectively marked the collapse of the Khwarezmian Empire. Although Jalal al-Din managed to escape and spent several years regrouping in India before returning to western Iran, the empire itself ceased to exist as a unified entity. Most of Iran fractured into smaller, local dynasties for the subsequent 2 decades. Khorasan became a devastated buffer region, and Transoxania was fully integrated into the Mongol Empire, remaining under constant threat of renewed Mongol aggression. Estimating the exact number of casualties resulting from the Mongol invasion is challenging due to inflated and often unreliable historical sources. Chroniclers such as Giovanni offer dramatic figures, claiming 2.4 million fatalities at Herat and 1.3 million at Merv, with another source listing 1.7 million deaths at Nishapur. These numbers likely serve as symbolic representations of widespread destruction rather than precise demographic counts. Realistically, no city within the Khwarezmian Empire at that time had populations approaching such figures, even considering the influx of refugees fleeing Mongol aggression. Giovanni's records at times present contradictory accounts, including reports of the Mongols killing 1.3 million people in Merv, followed shortly thereafter by another 10,000 deaths during a second assault. Moreover, distinguishing deaths directly attributable to Mongol combat actions from those caused by subsequent famine and disease outbreaks is complicated. Many essential irrigation systems that sustained local agriculture were destroyed, and the individuals responsible for their maintenance were either killed or displaced. Consequently, widespread starvation would have claimed countless additional lives. Internal conflicts also exacerbated the death toll, as communities seized the chaos of the Mongol invasion as an opportunity to settle long-standing grievances. Following the Mongol withdrawal, battles between emergent local dynasties, bandits, and rebellions further increased mortality rates. Additionally, massive displacement and enslavement led to the forced migration of tens or even hundreds of thousands of individuals, further devastating the region. Although obtaining precise casualty figures is impossible, it is plausible that between 1 and 3 million people died during or as an indirect result of the invasion. The impact was profound, leaving lasting physical, demographic, and psychological scars. The Mongols' reputation as agents of catastrophic destruction remains embedded in historical memory, frequently depicted in apocalyptic terms. Nonetheless, future episodes will examine how the regions affected by Mongol conquest attempted recovery and reconstruction under Mongol governance. Following Jalal al-Din Mingburnu's dramatic defeat at the Indus River, Genghis Khan initiated his journey back toward Mongolia. This extensive campaign had achieved unprecedented success, decisively dismantling the Khwarezmian Empire and establishing Mongol dominance across vast regions. The magnitude of these victories profoundly impacted Mongol culture and identity, reinforcing their belief that their triumphs were divinely sanctioned. It was widely accepted among the Mongols that their repeated successes were clear evidence of heaven's approval and divine destiny. How else, they reasoned, could their relatively small population achieve such consistent and overwhelming victories against larger, well-established empires and kingdoms? Wherever the Mongol armies appeared, their advance seemed unstoppable and their victory inevitable. At this stage in his life, Genghis Khan enjoyed almost complete, uncontested authority over the Mongol Empire. Nevertheless, despite his immense power and prestige, several critical, administrative, and strategic challenges required his attention. Foremost among these was establishing a stable and undisputed line of succession. Genghis understood the fragility of empires, particularly nomadic empires, which were notoriously vulnerable to internal divisions and power struggles after the death of their founders. To ensure the continuity of his legacy and to prevent civil unrest or fragmentation of his empire, Genghis Khan needed to designate a clear successor from among his sons and carefully plan the division of power and responsibility among his heirs. In upcoming episodes, we will delve into the extraordinary military expedition of Generals Jebe and Subutai, who embarked on an ambitious campaign through the Caucasus and into Eastern Europe. Their remarkable journey included significant confrontations, most notably the pivotal battle against the combined forces of the Russes principalities and Kipchak tribes at the Kalka River. This encounter not only demonstrated Mongol military ingenuity, but also revealed the Mongols to European powers as a formidable and mysterious threat emerging from the east. Furthermore, future discussions will examine the final years of Genghis Khan's remarkable life and reign, detailing his strategies to consolidate his vast empire, his efforts to secure his legacy, and the circumstances surrounding his death. These narratives will illuminate the enduring legacy and historical significance of one of history's most extraordinary conquerors. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the History of the Mongols. If you could please take a moment of your time and like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment for me, as it helps out massively. Thank you, and see you all next time.